Tonight, red flags. The uncomfortable reactions to people or situations that present potential harm. What are red flags in the context of romantic relationships, and why don't we notice them? Welcome to this first episode of True Crime Register, where I recap and examine cases from the American criminal justice system. I do my best to report each case accurately and in a way that does not disrespect victims or people that love them. Tonight's register is Reco Jones, the Sleepover murders. Let's get into it. The year was 1997. Reco Jones was a 22-year-old welder living with his mother in Detroit, Michigan. Jones was known as a player, having several girlfriends at the same time. For the past 9 months, Reco Jones had been involved in a pretty rocky relationship with a 24-year-old woman named Yolanda Bellamy. Yolanda and Reco started dating in December of 1996. In January of 1997, just 1 month into the relationship, Reco Jones was sent to prison for aggravated assault. It was a domestic violence charge unrelated to Yolanda Bellamy. During his incarceration, Yolanda ended the relationship because of Reco's jealousy. She told her sister that he constantly accused her of cheating and seemed to want to pick fights with her for no reason. After serving 6 months in prison, he was released in July of 1997 and the couple got back together. And the relationship continued to spiral downhill because although Reco was constantly accusing Yolanda of infidelity, he kept getting busted for doing the same thing. It was a very unstable situation and tense. At one point, Jones struck Yolanda with his open hand and Yolanda retaliated by slashing the tires on Reco's car. Yolanda Bellamy had confided in her younger sister Erica Bellamy about the problems between her and Jones. At the beginning of August 1997, Yolanda told Erica that she was going to break up with him. Yolanda was a mother of two boys, 5-year-old Nathan Burns Jr. and 3-year-old Nathan Burns III. Her sister Erica also had a son and daughter that were the same ages as Yolanda's boys, 5-year-old Delvante Bellamy and 3-year-old Shafante. The young cousins enjoyed a close friendship that involved sleepovers often, which was the case on Tuesday, August the 12th, 1997. Now, whenever Erica's children slept over at Yolanda's house, Erica would call first thing in the morning and come right over to pick them up. But this morning when she called, Yolanda didn't pick up the phone. After a couple more tries, she decided to just go on over to the house. Erica arrived at Yolanda's place on Rutherford Street in southwest Detroit at around 10:30 that morning. Erica was curious as to why her sister didn't answer the phone. Curious, but not particularly worried. There are so many innocent reasons why she might have missed the call. She could have been on the other line, in the restroom, taking care of the two toddlers. It could have been anything. But when Erica knocked at the door, she was met with thick, cold silence. No voices, no sound of movement inside the house. She rang the doorbell several times, and then, for some reason, perhaps curiosity or maybe pure maternal instinct, she knelt at the front door, lifted the small metal plate, and peered into the house through the mail slot. And there, on the floor, not far from that mail slot, was her daughter, 3-year-old Shafante Bellamy, lying on her back in a pool of blood, her eyes open and unmoving, fixed on the ceiling. Unable to gain entry to the house, Erica called 911. The Detroit police came and quickly used a battering ram to knock the door off its hinges. Behind that door, investigators found the aftermath of a heinous, bloody rampage. There was so much blood on the victims and all over the living room that the EMTs were unable to determine exactly what kind of injuries these victims even had. None of them had survived. For poor Erica, what had started out as an ordinary day had instantly become a nightmare. She had lost both of her children, her sister, and both her nephews. And while she's trying to wrap her head around this, the police are asking questions. They wanted to know who would do this. Did Erica know of anyone that might have a motive or even a desire to harm Yolanda and the children? Had anyone threatened her? Did she have a husband or boyfriend? Of course, Erica knew someone with a motive to harm Yolanda. Erica knew that Reco had hit her sister, that the two of them had done nothing but argue since Joan got out of prison. She told the police to look for Reco Jones. While CSI processed the crime scene, a bolo was issued for Jones just for questioning. The victims were sent to the coroner with the strict instruction that details about the autopsy not be shared with anyone except the Corps officers working the case. It just so happened that one of Reco Jones's uncles was a Detroit police officer. He heard his nephew's name over the radio and found out from Rico's mother that he was out to lunch with a female friend. The uncle went to the seafood restaurant and after a brief conversation, cuffed him and took him down to the police station. When Rico's uncle turned him in, he told deputies that, on the way over to the station, Reco had told him that he was angry with Yolanda because she was pregnant with his child and had threatened to terminate the pregnancy. Reco Jones was searched and photographed. Detectives noticed several small cuts on his left hand and forearm. He waived his right to remain silent. Like many perps, Reco thought he was smarter than the police and that he could just talk his way out of it. Jones was no stranger to the police. Given what they knew of his history with women, the Detroit investigation team decided that it would be best to have a woman conduct his interview. Enter Detective Monica Childs. I watched this entire trial on Court TV back in 1998, and I've seen her work in other cases. The woman is wily. She can make herself seem very non-threatening, almost slow-witted, and gullible. And suspects just keep on talking because they think they're running a game on her. I actually still have dozens of Court TV trials on tape. I would love to post them on YouTube for all of you, but Court TV charges an arm and a leg just to use 15 seconds of their footage. Over the next 2 days, Reco Jones spent several hours talking to the police. His initial story was that he had gone over to Yolanda's house at around 3 a.m. on August the 13th to return some CDs. He said that they got into an argument and he started choking Yolanda, but he let go of her and stormed out of the house. He said she was coughing and gasping when he left. He denied having anything to do with the killings, saying that he, quote, could never cut those kids up like that. But as he grew more comfortable, his attitude changed. He started cursing and saying that Yolanda never respected him and that she didn't think he was a man. He said that she just told him she was pregnant with his child, the same thing his uncle had relayed to detectives and colleagues back at the station, and that she was going to terminate the pregnancy. On the second day of interrogation, Jones asked Monica Childs, "Do you think a person can flip out, go into a frenzy, and do something bad, but they didn't have any control over themselves when they did it?" To which Detective Childs replied, "No." His face contorted and he snapped at the detective. "You knew it was me all day. You just been playing with me this whole time." Monica Childs said she just stared at him. Jones then asked for a moment alone. The detective obliged. She left the room. Now, during the questioning, Jones must have noticed that 2 of the bolts on the metal grating that covered the window of the interview room were either missing or loose, because the minute she left, he snatched that grate straight off the window and dove headfirst out of the 5th floor police headquarters, using his arm to break his fall on the concrete below. Paramedics said his arm was a bloody, mangled mess. He was never able to even stand up or try to run away. They just handcuffed him to a gurney and took him to the hospital. He was in critical condition for a few days. He underwent 21 hours of surgery due to serious abdominal injuries sustained in the jump. Some trial watchers at the time said that Jones was trying to commit suicide when he jumped, but as one of the investigators pointed out at trial, he wouldn't have tried to break his fall at all if he had really wanted to die. Jones's interview with the police was not recorded in any way except in the detective's notes. I'm relaying the notes as they were testified to at trial. But Jones was right about one thing. Detective Childs had known all along it was him, because how could he have known that the victims had been, quote, cut up, unquote? Jones was booked on 5 counts of first-degree murder. As you can imagine, these murders devastated the community. From the morning that the bodies were discovered through the end of Reco Jones's trial, the Bellamy family was flooded with bags and bags of sympathy cards, stuffed animals, crosses, and many, many little angel figurines. And people were outraged. 2 witnesses that testified at the preliminary hearing were threatened in open court. When the trial started in March of 1998, the court had to assign security guards to escort Jones's mother in and out of the courtroom. This was a trial where everybody cried. The prosecutor, who had 16 years of experience, the detectives, the police officers, who, by the way, were given 30-day sabbaticals due to the trauma of working the crime scene, and the members of the jury. On the 3rd day of trial, a loud argument broke out between members of Jones's family and the Burns. All parties were admonished by Judge Kim Worthy, who told them, "This is not a nightclub." She threatened to ban the families from proceedings if there were any further outbursts. In his opening statement, prosecutor Kevin Simowski described Jones as controlling, manipulative, and violent. He said that they had argued about money on August the 11th and that Yolanda Bellamy had dumped Reco. Simowski told the jury that Reco Jones had been stewing for weeks over Yolanda's attempts to end the relationship, particularly over the fact that the boy's father, Nate Sr., was soon to be released from prison and would be returning to the home. It was over, for good this time. That, added to Yolanda's refusal to carry Reco's child to term, had all culminated in a quintuple homicide. The first witnesses were first responders, EMTs, crime scene photographers, and police officers. Next up was Reco's uncle. When Reco's uncle, the police officer, took the stand, he denied telling anyone that Jones had said anything about a pregnancy or being angry with Yolanda. In fact, the uncle testified that Jones never made any sort of admission at all. He said Reco hadn't even been sure which girlfriend he was talking about, that he had asked, "Who?" when the uncle told him that his girlfriend had been murdered. The uncle said everyone knew that the victims had been stabbed, that it hadn't been kept a secret. I call BS because all 5 autopsies could not have been completed with reports written up 4 or 5 hours later when Jones was detained. And even the EMTs themselves had no idea what types of injuries these were. Jones's uncle was impeached twice during his testimony. The state of Michigan put 3 of Reco Jones's girlfriends on the stand. Their testimony really helped fill in the timeline for the night of these murders. It also provided a cautionary tale about the ratchetness that thirsty, desperate women will sink to when they call themselves in love. The first girlfriend that came to the stand asked that her face not be shown on court TV and that her name not be published, so I'm not going to publish it here. She testified that her understanding was that Yolanda was the violent and aggressive one in all of this. Reco had been telling her that Yolanda was making threats against her and her family. She said this had been going on until just 2 days before the murders. She said she was concerned for her safety because she had been with Reco the night his tires got slashed, although it had been dark and she hadn't been able to see the perpetrator's face. This first witness had also visited Reco in jail while he was awaiting trial. She said that Jones had expressed shock over the murders and that he was hurt that people would think he could actually do something so awful.